as soon as he can. Okay. Hey everyone, it is Thursday at 1 o'clock Eastern Time, and this is Marketing Live. I am your host, Tim Jones. I have the great honor of serving as the Associate Vice President for Marketing at Clarkson University in beautiful Potsdam, New York. But today on Marketing Live, we're going to be talking about developing, planning, spending your marketing budget. And I'd like to welcome my guests here. I have Patrick Burt, who will be with us momentarily, and David Hooper.
Hello.
And Jessica Rude. And we'll introduce them a little bit more formally in just a minute. So thanks for tuning in today to Marketing Live. Marketing Live is part of the Higher Ed Live Network, a series of professional development web shows and podcasts which are always free and accessible online in the archives at higheredlive.com and also in iTunes. You can be part of our broadcast today by tuning in live and sharing your insights and questions using the hashtag HigherEdLive on Twitter. And you can receive weekly updates with the show live dates and times by subscribing to Higher Ed Live newsletter. And also, a special note, we'd like to encourage you to take a few minutes and tell us what you think of Higher Ed Live and what you'd like to see in the future from Higher Ed Live by just taking a very quick survey. You can enter a drawing for a gift card as well, so it shouldn't take you more than 5 minutes. And we'll send that link out on Twitter in a couple minutes. But if you just can't wait, it's go to higheredlive.com/survey. Higher Ed Live is produced by M. Stoner, a marketing and communications firm that works with education institutions on branding, strategy, web design, and more. And today's show would not be possible without M. Stoner and, of course, the support of Clarkson University. Marketing Live is sponsored by FormStack. FormStack is a robust online form building solution with an intuitive drag-and-drop interface. The platform makes it easy for marketers to create branded, mobile-ready web forms without knowing code. Build donation forms, contact forms, event registrations, and more with the web's only 508 compliant form builder. You can publish your forms and leverage FormStack's social media plugins to maximize your traffic. With in-app analytics and integrations with popular marketing tools, you can even get even more out of your captured responses. So visit www.formstack.com to learn more about the ways FormStack can double your response rates. All right, so today we have 3 exceptional guests, and I read their names at the beginning of the show, but just a little bit more. We have Patrick Burt. Patrick is the creative director at the University of Central Florida. Say hi so everyone can see who I'm talking about.
Hello.
We have David Hooper, and David is the Assistant Vice President of Digital Marketing and Content Strategy at Longwood University.
Hello.
And we have Jessica Rude. Jessica is the Director of Communications and Marketing at New College of Florida.
Hello.
So we basically have the entire East Coast covered today, from New York to Florida and a midpoint in Virginia. So well done. So sorry about the West Coast, but we still love you. So today we're going to talk about higher education budgets, planning, marketing, spending. You know, with the switchover of the fiscal year, it seemed like a really good time to talk about how we're planning, thinking about spending our marketing dollars, or thinking about doing marketing without any dollars, that kind of thing as well. So yeah, let's jump right into it. So although we're going to talk a lot about spending money today, I also want to spend a good bit of time talking about strategy and planning, because I think too often we get caught up in the spending and reactionary remnant rates and all of that stuff, which we'll get into a little bit. But before we get going too far, I want to ask if we could shorten the whole show, if any of you has a very specific formula for how to do this. So if it's like 68% digital, 12% print, split between display, search. Anyone got a tried and true easy solution?
Tim, I'm not sure we'd have jobs if it was that easy.
Yeah, I guess that's true. So if you do, just let me know offline, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, I laughed a bit when I saw that question.
Yeah, I'd like to believe that, but we wouldn't be talking about it if it were that easy, because we're all at different sized institutions. We all have a lot to worry about and think about. So, yeah. So let's start kind of at the top of it. Let's start with the marketing plan itself. So I read just recently somewhere that said that 80 to 85% of small to mid-sized businesses have marketing budgets, but they don't even have a marketing plan, which is bizarre to me that you could have one and not the other, but I'm guessing it's not as uncommon given that it's 80 to 85%. So tell me, from your perspective, do you at your institution have a marketing plan, even if it's not one you've created? Do you have something to work with or work from? And is it actually a useful thing or not? Anyone can jump in on that one.
I'll jump in. I mean, I was actually kind of shocked a little bit and kind of unshocked, I guess, with that statistic of 80 to 85%. We typically do, to some degree, have a documented plan. It doesn't always include everything. It's something we'll typically work with our marketing firm on, and we'll have a variety of strategies and tactics in there for the coming year. But I could see if you weren't working with a firm and you're a small school, it'd be a lot of work and planning involved in developing a plan like that. So I guess I'm not surprised. But.
And how far out does your plan look? Is it a yearly thing? Do you update it?
Yeah, so it's typically for the calendar year. We usually do 2 campaigns. We'll do a fall campaign and a spring campaign.
Excellent. So how about you, Jessica?
Well, so this is the 4th higher ed institution I've worked for, and I think that at all of them, there's been some form of a marketing plan. I don't know if it's necessarily described as such as the title, but I think that there's always been one, and it varies greatly as to what the format is and what it covers exactly, and how it's really utilized. And I almost think that sometimes too much emphasis is put on over planning the plan itself.
Absolutely.
And a lot less implementation and a lot more planning. Sometimes I find at a lot of places that I've been.
Yeah, I've been in places with 30 and 40-page marketing plans that are 1 year, that sort of get so far down on the tactical elements of it that we never actually get to executing those tactics. We spend a lot of time thinking about more tactics that we could add. So that's very true. So, Patrick, how about at UCF?
UCF, we're a fairly large institution, so it seems like we would have a more coordinated effort. But I think everybody understands what we're doing, and again, probably a fall and a spring campaign. But when you're really looking at it, having 12 colleges, being 60,000 students, each college has a marketing budget and therefore potentially would have their own marketing plan for the things that they're dealing with. We generally try to deal with the top level stuff, and so I think we always use the term strategy in the rearview mirror sometimes. We always have that plan set out and the understanding of where we're going, but it helps us to deal with those pop-up things that come down the road. So whenever leadership changes their direction, we sort of have to maneuver and change with them.
So ideally, assuming we all have marketing plans, which it sounds like we're in the minority for small to mid-sized businesses, which is good that higher ed is ahead of small to mid-sized businesses as an industry, but what would you have ideally in that plan? You mentioned, Jessica, that sort of the emphasis on over-planning, and just a sort of a reference to a little bit too far on the tactical side. So what would you have in that marketing plan, and what areas would it cover?
I found that it's really useful to have very specific targets and very specific tasks for each of the sub-departments to really tackle. I think it's important, so news and media, and not just saying, I mean, in every marketing plan, I think in news and media planning, it says somewhere in there, be able to reach national markets, right? That's always in the job description, and it's always in the marketing plan. And, 50% of it's luck, and the other 50% is placement. So how exactly is that going to happen, and what are the steps we're going to take to do that? And that really falls in line with institutional goals a lot of times for your plans, things like that. It also falls in line with departmental goals. So a lot of times, all of these, it's finding how all of these documents coordinate together. And I think then having very specific tasks within the marketing plan, or whatever you want to call it. It could be just an office plan. It could be a strategy map. And how those tasks are going to be implemented, and what tools we're going to be using, or we're going to look into using, to be able to get those things done.
How about for others, anything that you absolutely want to see? I mean, in terms of those clearly stated goals, like recruitment targets or fundraising targets?
I mean, for us, we're really focused on building awareness of the institution. We work with our admissions office and our alumni office on some of those other tactics, but typically our plans are associated with building awareness, and so that kind of keeps it a little bit simpler. To Jessica's point, I agree. Like, if you start to get into a 100-page plan, it just gets overwhelming, and no one's going to read it, no one's going to follow it. So, we typically get to a 10-page plan. That would outline objectives, strategies, and tactics, and timeline and estimated budget, ideally.
So how about measurement components? So to what extent should a marketing plan commit to measures of accountability, I guess, as saying, we're going to do this tactic, we're going to pursue this tactic in this market. we're going to spend this much money, and we're going to be accountable for this outcome. I know that's sometimes less common in marketing plans because so much of that is, as you said, some of it's just broad awareness and sort of the residual effect and lift you get from those efforts. But how much should be in a marketing plan? And sort of in an ideal world, not in the realistic one we live in. Sort of this idealized world, how specific should that get?
I think you should put something in there that's a number that's a goal that you're trying to achieve. Because if we talk about goals and tactics and strategies, but if there's no intended outcome for some of those pieces, then there's not a good way to see whether or not you need to adjust down the road for what you're trying to accomplish. Mm-hmm. So I think that even if it's you don't know, and you're trying to go after those achievement, whether it's let's try to get so many more high achievers, let's get so many more signups, or just kind of putting out there. I mean, most everybody probably is including some sort of impression count or something that they're trying to reach in the hundreds of thousands or whatever. But if you really can try to tie it to something that generates some sort of revenue, some sort of donation, I think those are real goals that you can try to strive for. If you don't meet them, you can always adjust them. And so I think those are good things to have in a plan. Just managing expectations in case it doesn't happen is something that you need to consider.
Yeah. It seems like there's always the fear of being actually held accountable for the outcomes of marketing, but I think that's sort of shifting, and I think we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a bit. But a quick reminder, so for anyone watching, those of you who want to join on Twitter, feel free to tweet at us using the hashtag HigherEdLive, and we will do our best to get it on the show and answer it. So thinking about the marketing plan and how the specifics inside of that plan reflect your institution, and thinking about things like channel strategies and specific tactics that you pursue, I'm always fascinated at the difference. I've had the chance to work at 3 different institutions, and all of them had a very different market position, I guess is a good way to say that. But always the marketing plans were sort of really well tuned to the brand itself, and I feel like that's a fairly recent movement in higher education, that we're really taking stock of what we do and how it reflects our brand. So whether we're really heavy on social media, whether we really emphasize traditional print or broadcast or any of those things. So talk a little bit about how your institutions are adopting tactics or selecting marketing channels or specific aspects of marketing that really do reflect your brand, and how's that changed over time?
I can talk to this a little bit. I think that this is really cliche to say, but this morning I was thinking about this question a little bit, and I was thinking to myself, well, what is marketing, right? And I mean, it doesn't have the same meaning that it did even 5 years ago. And communications is marketing. We've turned from public affairs to communications and marketing, and I think people are finally understanding that all of these things, including other divisions, are communications and marketing and are affecting communications and marketing. So I think a lot of divisions on campuses are really looking to see what their activities are, and they're consulting with us for advice on that. So whether it's a speech, whether it's a PowerPoint that they're giving in California at a really big conference, whether it's a student poster presentation, how is that portraying the college or university that they're working for? Mm-hmm. I think it runs the gamut now, and I think a lot of people on campus are really seeing the effects of those things.
That's great.
For us, it's really I think the biggest channel we're hitting now is social media. I mean, it really fits into kind of our small knit community and being engaged with each other, and so we, over the last couple of years, we've been doing a lot more on that channel. And I hadn't really thought about it that way. It's an interesting thought about the marketing channel actually reflecting your brand. We're mainly thinking about how our brand messages are being relayed in our marketing, in the specific marketing tactics. But that's true. I mean, the social media really fits in well with what we're doing at Longwood.
Yeah, that's for Clarkson, it's a small school. It's in an interesting geographic location, sort of away from a lot of things. So digital is really critical for us. It's one of the ways that we've sort of democratized access to the rest of the country, and I think it's fantastic. And so we're really pushing hard on the digital front. And it just got me thinking, schools like UCF who are I'd say 300,000 times the size of Clarkson. I'm not sure if that's exact, but it's probably pretty close. Probably aren't necessarily worried about the same kinds of things. So I was curious, Patrick, from your perspective, what kind of things are you guys doing that are really well tuned to your brand in terms of choosing channels or tactics?
I think we definitely started down the social media path, which is what kind of everybody did as it sort of rose and Facebook grew, and those types of things are really focusing on the digital. But most recently, in the past 2 years, we've spent a lot of time focusing on connecting with our unengaged alumni and really incorporating part of that channel for our alumni magazine and kind of transitioning more to a university magazine to reconnect with. We have some 200,000 plus, I think, living alumni, and a great percentage of those live in the Central Florida region as well as throughout Florida. So really taking a different kind of channel that was maybe controlled by our alumni association and trying to incorporate a lot more pieces and parts of the brand of UCF, talking about research, talking about student outcomes, talking about a lot of things that are happening here and reconnecting alumni with what's going on at UCF now. So even some of the things that had been around for a long time, like alumni publications or publications, trying to retool and reconnect with those in the same way that we're sort of dealing with social media and how the same messages and topics that we're putting out through some of those areas, engaging them and reminding them of what they remember and what they felt good about UCF.
That's great. So a lot of that comes down to selecting the right places to reach your target audiences. And so let's talk a little bit about how we all kind of go about segmenting audiences. You know, there's a lot of overlap in the kinds of people we're reaching out to. Alums, maybe not as much, but alumni, prospective students, corporate partners, those kinds of groups. It's important that we, I think, develop strategies that speak specifically to those audiences. And with the advent of digital and sort of the granularity with which you can target, it seems like it's getting easier and easier to pick exactly the right audience. So how do you go about segmenting audiences as you sort of plan your marketing efforts yearly or every couple of years? What are you looking for, and how do you divide up those groups to sort of separate your tactical and execution elements?
I can speak to that if you want. I think it's really comes down to another kind of simple thing where you can say, what's the goal? So if you're segmenting in the fundraising area, if it's like a spring appeal or something like that, I don't necessarily go to the vehicle first. I think about what our message is and how that's going to be best delivered. So if it's, if it's the 80+ crowd, is social media going to be the place we're going to solicit them? Most likely not. And how are we going to segment that versus the crowd of the most recent graduates that have changed their address 3 times since they've graduated? So it's, it's goal first and then vehicle second.
Yeah, that's smart.
Yeah, for us, I guess it depends on the marketing tactics specifically. A lot of it is based on kind of enrollment research. We're given a lot of information on audiences from our admissions office, and they've identified the regions down to specific high schools in terms of prospective students. So we're actually starting to do specific promotions to these high schools, these specific high schools, sponsoring athletic games, ads in their newspapers, even on Twitter, like tweeting congratulations when they win a school game or something. So some of that data is very valuable. And actually, there's an initiative going on right now that just started this year, looking into the data, retention data, so that we can better identify not just the students that will attend Longwood, but the students that will attend Longwood and stay at Longwood instead of transferring out. So.
And with an audience as large as yours, Patrick, I imagine there's lots to consider.
Yeah, it's there's a lot of units, a lot of things, a lot of pieces and moving parts. So I think that we're starting to get into developing a little bit more segmentation on some of the admissions pieces and looking at high-achieving students and scholars. In general, UCF doesn't necessarily have an enrollment problem. We always want to be growing the quality of our enrollment. So that's one of those challenges. We also have a large transfer population, so targeting specifically the messages for the transfers as well as our regional campuses, that's a little different older student, so you can't exactly just flip the same degree message and that you would give to current seniors in high school to folks who are 28 or 29 years old who are looking to complete a degree or accomplish a degree or have gone 2 to 4 years of a community college or a Florida college system to try to complete their degree. So they're usually a little bit longer in completing their degree. So those are different messages. Those are convenience messages. Those are locale messages. And how does that change versus a student who may want to come to sunny Florida from, for instance, New York, where it gets kind of cold in the winter? So,
haven't been here long enough to hear that.
Social media is great for that too. I think when you can drill down in the ads and say, you know, specifically when we're looking for recruitment in New York, New England, that area, because we are in Florida and New College and UCF, we can specifically, like last year we took a map in one of the big cold spurts in the Northeast and we put, you know, cold there, it's a hashtag New College is warm. And you can specifically say where that's going to go. So I think you can take your audience and your goal and break that down, and social media is a great way to do that. It's really, really simple and cost-effective.
So that's an interesting approach. So what kind of data do you use to inform those marketing insights, I guess? So that's pretty clever, although it's a little bit mean-spirited to those of us up here. But anyhow. So what other kinds of data are you looking for? I think, David, you mentioned working with admissions and sort of seeing some of the data that they have, and everyone kind of mentioned that, but a lot of the times we find that we don't always have the most accurate or most relevant data. We have tons and tons of data. We collect everything, but we don't always apply any kind of marketing insight to it. So I'm curious what kind of data you use and how that plays a part in your marketing efforts.
In terms of, I mean, that's kind of a broad question, I guess. I mean, we use, in terms of our paid advertising, we do a lot of different segmentation, and we'll just try a lot. You know, we'll base it on some third-party data, and this is all working with our firm, but third-party data, contextual segmenting, behavioral stuff. Mm-hmm. And the nice thing with the digital is that you can try all those things and really see what's working and make adjustments on the fly. For instance, the contextual targeting ads that we were running one fall just weren't panning out compared to the others. So we just dropped that completely and went through it with some of the other data and segmentation options for paid advertising.
So do you find that the expectation around sort of more granular segmentation is also more back to that accountability, but the measurement component of that you're expected to have better, higher, more efficient results based on your targeting, or do you feel like there's a lot of room to, as you said, sort of test and explore and adjust?
Yeah, I think the biggest advantage is being able to test, explore, and adjust. But obviously the outcome of it is so that you can, like for us, the engagement metrics are the biggest metrics that we look at in terms of general awareness. I mean, if they're engaging with our ad units and stuff, then that's kind of a win for us. So, you know, we'll play with the targeting and segmentation pieces in order to increase engagement rates on our ads.
How about for, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that I think that too, when it comes, there's a huge conversation about data and metrics, and it's ongoing, right? How do we take the most informed information and make that into a marketing campaign? I just presented on this consultants back in June at SUNY, and I think we're a big component that a lot of internal communications offices are missing too and failing to recognize in themselves is that there's experts. That you're an expert, that everyone in your communications office is an expert, and that's why you were hired in this field. And that sometimes the analytics, the data, are looking at experience and your background and just trusting your gut and trying something new. And I think you were just talking about that, testing and trying different things. But look at the data, try to make some sense of it and benchmark and try to start from somewhere. But also, if you haven't, I mean, you should know your university or college best. And if you have an idea and you think it might work with that specific audience, I think that sometimes you can overlook a lot of the statistics and a lot of the data, and those are some of the best campaigns that you'll have.
Sometimes it's just a gut check. I mean, quite honestly, yeah.
I agree with Jessica on that. I mean, you mentioned the Florida thing and the sunny weather. and Jessica probably realizes, or this is maybe where it came from, is we asked our students why they came to UCF from some of those destinations, and sunshine and weather and shorts and flip-flops are what resonate. So sometimes you don't need ones and zeros and lots of complex data. It's just reassurance on the gut that you walk around campus, you see people enjoying the sunny weather and hopefully no cold weather, and you can sort of think about ways to use that in your favor. Digital is a great way if you're looking at those campaigns, and I agree. Being able to adjust. So if you do have something, it's not as performing as well as you think it should be, adjusting and changing. So having those capabilities to try out an idea and not feel like you're going to fall flat on your face is always a good option.
So we spent a little bit of time, probably a lot of time, on the strategy and planning and sort of thinking through where we might actually spend some money. So now that we're in the new fiscal year and we have an opportunity to maybe use our money a little bit differently, if we have any at all, where do you start with so much to consider? I mean, there's the data side, there's the goals, there's targeting, there's segmentation, there's all of these things at work. So where do you start?
I'll jump in, I guess. There's been a couple initiatives and things that we just have seen work year after year. So some of those will obviously continue. Our retargeting display ad units always perform very, very high in terms of re-engaging visitors. So we usually include that in every campaign. And then the last year or two, we've been focused on kind of what Jessica was getting at, some of the really granular targeting on Facebook and social media. And we've seen a lot of great results with the very custom targeting content on social media. And so, that's a great place to also play around with. I mean, one of the things in terms of budget and stuff, we'll probably get more into this a little bit later, but, if you can get just a little pot of money of, I think we were working with like $5,000 this year, of just kind of playing around with some tactics on social media and some of that targeting. Like we did a targeted sweepstakes on Facebook and some A/B testing of different kinds of ad units using that pot of money, and really only had to spend a couple $100, for over a couple days to see if something was working well, and then we can put more money into it. I think people are sometimes afraid of it not working, but if you're only, if you spend a couple $100 to find out it's not going to work, then it's worth it, really. And then you know where to put the rest of your money in.
Yeah, and I had one of my previous bosses used to say that funding follows success. It's never the other way around. And so if you can take a small pot of money and invest it to figure out what's going to work and then demonstrate that, look at this, it's going to work. We have evidence that tells us this is going to be an effective campaign. And that's good. I'm glad you mentioned a specific dollar amount. I know a lot of folks, particularly on the digital side, they want to know how cheap they can get in on digital. And I think $5,000 is a good sort of good bar. But you mentioned a couple $100 over a few days. You can do some really short tests, or really specifically targeted for 1, 2, 3, 4, 500, somewhere in there. So. Yeah, that's good. That's good advice. I think I like the idea of testing a lot. I think that social and digital in particular can really refine your messaging. You can improve sort of the creative that goes into it. All of those things can get dramatically better just by investing a tiny little bit, even if it's for a year out. So if you spend some money now, you only get $500. You say, I want to try this out, so that next year we can ask for more money and do this at a bigger scale. I think that's a really important technique in marketing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we tried like 2 different posts with just 2 different images just to see how much the image affected, the click-through rates on some of those ads. And it was shocking, kind of what we found with some of those for $100.
Yep. Yeah, we find when I worked at NC State, we did a lot of this around which logo treatment was better, which one tracked better with alumni versus prospective students versus potential donors, and they're not the same, which is an important message that we need to have at least something specific for each of those audiences. We can't just pick the single athletics logo and expect it to carry the load for everything that we do. So yeah, it's fascinating stuff. Any other thoughts on that, or?
I think you can start looking at, as far as budget goes, looking at what's really going to cost you money. You know, print is definitely going to cost you money. Print advertising is definitely going to cost you money. What are you spending on it currently? And, you know, again, looking at what you think your audience is looking for. I know that when I got to New College, we, in my opinion, had spent a disproportionate amount on print advertising versus some of the other things, so we readjusted that. You can take it, break it down, and organize it so a lot of the things that you might have paid for in the past, you could accomplish that same goal for free. Inside Higher Ed has a great option where you can go. There's like 6 or 7 different editorial options you can do in Inside Higher Ed for free. It costs you absolutely nothing, and it's, you know, hosting events. It's there's a bunch of things if you work with a rep there. So maybe something that you were accomplishing with print advertising in the past, you could get do some other options, some other avenues there, and then refocus those dollars to some social media advertising or something else.
So how do you guys feel about that mix? So big, broad awareness, send it to everyone, versus more focus on specific, targeted, kind of half and half. Where do you guys tend to fall in that argument?
We actually, I think we still do what I would consider to be a fair amount of print in the mix. To our audience, I think there's, since we're a young university, only about 50 years old, they're not always expecting to see us in some of the print publications. So using like subscriber bases for you know, thought leader packages for publications, I think has a value to it versus, you know, a lot of the folks, if they have multiple institutions or they have kids or alumni or that kind of an idea who are interested in different institutions, they're getting a lot of that bombardment on social media. They're getting a lot of bombardment from, you know, accounts and from advertising and from Facebook likes and from friends. So even having a healthy mix of print showing up in the proper place to see that your institution is associated with being in a Time magazine. I don't know that a lot of those subscribers realize that you can target that down to a zip pretty closely versus that's not a national ad. And every once in a while, we've seen the publications actually mess up and run one of our ads nationally, and that's a big bonus. But you know, when something like that happens, but I think, you know, being in print publications in a smart way is a good place to show that you're, you know, a competitor with some of the other you know, private companies and some of the GEs and some of the other groups that you're with, that you're being seen with in those publications.
Yeah, and that takes a good amount of sort of that planning step to understanding where you'll be most relevant, particularly as you geo-target placements with M&I or any of the other organizations to do those sort of broad placements. And that's has an additional benefit, and you alluded to this, but of making it seem like you're in more places than you are. And that's really helpful for specific administrators. We'll just say that. The vertical chain likes to see themselves in Time. They like to see themselves in any kind of thought leader publication. And so I think there's some value in that, even if it's just to get more money the next year or to improve credibility, or just, like you said, there's a lot of benefit to that. So we'll talk a lot about digital because I think that's probably where most of our time gets spent, but there is a lot of value in that. I think the trick there is figuring out how to measure it outside of it being a vanity placement, and working with some of those subscribers and all the things you can. You can do subscriber surveys and that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, it's really just to make everyone feel good about where you are, I think, in some places. Right. So.
I mean, you wouldn't necessarily be running a recruitment ad inside of a Time magazine or something, you know, really focusing on what your target is. But we've had requests before from our admissions groups to run inside of 17 magazine and some other publications that are targeted towards teens. Mm-hmm. So again, in their print media, I don't know how many teenagers read 17 magazine. It's been a number of years since we did something like that. But again, magazines are doing quite well with readership, especially university alumni publications. So magazines are continuing to do well in print format.
I think too, as far as measuring them, this is by no means my idea, and I'm sure you've all heard this before, but you can still measure print mailings by loosely tying them back to your website statistics, loosely tying it back to your application statistics. You know, for anyone out there who hasn't really done that, you can really grab Google Analytics and say, well, we placed something in Time magazine last month, and our web hits went up by 300% or something like that. I mean, you can, of course, make the direct correlation, but there certainly has to be something to be said for that placement. So I think that's when you're reporting to boards and things like that, when I present about those, because it's a loose tie, and it helps them understand why print is still very relevant and important.
Yeah, you do usually see, or at least you should, see a lift on your digital properties when you do effective targeting on the traditional print, broadcast, etc. side. So I do think that's also a good way to keep that mindset that you have to have destination content before you place an ad, because there have been many times where people say, we need to place an ad here. I say, where's it going to go? I have no idea. We just need that ad done. But I think that's the sort of that accountability piece I think is really important, and using digital to inform print, I think is a great way to keep that media mix healthy and also understand how the two play together and how they're sort of achieving those goals in concert with one another. So let's talk a little bit about specifics in terms of content and digital. I think, Jessica, you mentioned this, that there are plenty of free things that you can do. And I think that's absolutely a viable strategy, particularly as you're trying to make a case for more money, is to show with more investment we could do more of this. But also, there's a tendency for us to move in that direction in higher education, because I think more often than not, we're not celebrating million-dollar influxes in marketing budgets. We're typically trying to find ways to do more and hit the same return with a little bit less investment or a little bit smarter investment. And that's not always the best place to be, but sometimes that's the reality that we face, particularly at state schools and others, state-funded schools in particular. So we do a lot of the stuff with advertising or sort of thought leadership and content marketing and those kinds of SEO sort of tactics. How reasonable is it to expect the same kind of results from those that you would typically see from paid efforts? Anyone? Are
you asking me specifically, you think? Or?
No, I'm sort of a broad, open-ended question, because I think on the one hand, it's nice to say that we did this for free. On the other hand, you don't want to always be asked to do things for free, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
You don't want to set a precedent that it doesn't take any effort. I had a colleague who used to say, social media is only free if your time is worthless, and I think that's an important message, particularly as you sort of pitch it up, to keep in mind that there is a cost. It's a resource cost at the very least, and so it's not necessarily free. It's just the placement itself is theoretically free. So I'm just curious how you balance those expectations and also how you inject that into your marketing mix. And so what percentage of your time should be devoted to creating things that are going to be placed in free versus, in some ways, an easier strategy, which is just to place an ad and let it run?
This is where I find analytics really important. Mm-hmm. And this is where when I go to a board or when I go to senior staff and I talk about, time I presented, I did and it had basically, since we had really putting some energy into social media, what kind of returns that got us. And then I showed a graph of my time, and I had just estimated some of the different times that I had put into social media, and there was a direct line between the time that I had put into social media and the returns that we were getting on social media, as far as likes, as far as engagement, all that. So I think that that's one of those times where you can really use data to show that, there's a direct correlation between something that's, digital is not free, the web is not free, social is not free, and that when the less time we're able to spend or the less resources we put into a position or consultants, the less your return you're going to see on those things.
Yeah, we ended up developing, it got to be a little bit of an issue with people just kind of, not just because it's free, but because it's an easy kind of catch-all place to throw things up. So if someone got a lot of pressure to promote something that we didn't feel like really needed to be promoted, then it might come down that, from somebody that, hey, let's just post this on the Facebook page to make them happy. And so that was kind of issue because they weren't obviously looking at the big picture with that. And so we developed some general procedural guidelines that we follow in terms of posting on social media and stuff. And that's at least something that we can show them about our approach and show why this doesn't fit in with our approach. And we've had to do that quite a few times, and it's helped since we've developed that.
As far as channels and getting free media or free more push out of things that are already being done, we've tried to create systems like an events calendar or systems like a collaborative news blog, where those are very shareable, very open, and very feed oriented, so that if someone does want to pick up that information and share it on social media, or if organizations do want to consume the feeds, they're available in multiple formats. So that's not really a manual process where we have to be going and posting to other services. They can actually just pick up on our feed and display, as well as some of the issues with folks wanting to post things on social media that we don't necessarily want to promote. We've always given them opportunities to have their own calendars within our event system, so they have their ability to post and the ability to submit to a bigger calendar to help out with some of that, as well as kind of the same way with the Facebook. It might be something that's great for your audience, for your smaller group on Facebook. It's not something that needs to go to the university-wide audience on UCF's main Facebook page. So being able to break it down that way and kind of share that load. But a lot of what we do on the technology side is make sure that our information is easy to get through, through feeds using CMSs or other services, so that if somebody wants to easily share that, whether it be the person writing it or a person who picks up on it, being able to take that and just kind of plop it wherever they want to.
So one of the other interesting aspects about sort of the free channels, or sort of the owned channels, is that we're universities, so we create a ton of content. I mean, we're churning out stuff left and right. We have the great advantage in the digital space of being somewhat credible by ending in .edu, which is particularly helpful for us. So how are you using content particularly to support your marketing efforts, or how's that relating sort of in the mix of things that you're doing?
This is by far my favorite topic, content. That's probably the biggest focus this year. We actually restructured our department to help generate more content, and my new title is an indication of that. Content strategy in it. And so two big content marketing strategies have stuck out that we've done just in the last couple of months, at least, and seen great results. One is developing specific content that's easy to digest and share. Think like BuzzFeed. We, in fact, ended up decided to really approach this hard and developed what we call Longwood Buzz microsite, buzz.longwood.edu, focused exclusively on this type of content. And we were shocked with the stats that we saw from this content compared to our traditional articles. We had our first article is 10 ways to know that you know you're a Longwood student. And it had over like 11,000 visits in 3 days, and it was shared 3,000 times, in comparison to a typical news article that we put out that might get like 200 visits. I mean, it was dramatic. And that was only from sending, it started organically. We just sent it to 20 people, a couple of alums and students that started sharing it, and it kind of just blew up from there. So that's one thing we're focusing on, is creating a bunch of articles like that. The other thing is developing content that ties into current trends, cultural trends. For instance, with the whole Game of Thrones popularity, we had a medieval professor show how one of the duels, the Mountain versus Viper duel, actually echoed medieval history, and pitched that and put that on social media, and it received national attention. It got in the Huffington Post and Wall Street Journal, and the Buzz article on that buzz.longwood.edu site had like 13,000 shares on Facebook. Half of the people that went to it shared it. So those two things together, I mean, I read this great quote recently, content is fire and social media is the gasoline, and that's exactly what we've seen from these two strategies, is developing that good shareable content that ties into cultural trends, and then using social media to kind of blow it up.
Yeah, that's great. I know when at NC State, they used to do around the Avengers, we had some material science professors talking about the plausibility of specific elements in comics, and almost every single time those things were shared and picked up. It's a great media relations strategy as well. I mean, it's one of those sort of, I hate the phrase win-win, but it does really accomplish everything you want it to accomplish with one piece of content, just distributed in a non-paid place, and you can end up in Wired, Huffington Post, places that would cost you an arm and a leg otherwise. So I think content is one of the great equalizers for us in higher education, particularly because we have such a wide variety of expertise, topical expertise, and I think it's extraordinary that you're finding ways to connect that expertise that is sometimes esoteric with this sort of really relatable, understandable, popular culture kind of sensibility. I think that's just a brilliant strategy and excellent work.
Thank you. Thank you.
So how else are we using content? Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say that's where visual graphics can come into play a lot more than they used to too. I think that, you know, myself coming from a creative services background, a lot of times that was like after the content had been written. So, but now it's just the opposite in some cases. In some cases, I think you can really start from the visual side first and try to be able to push that content out before sometimes an article. We just did an infographic on, we changed the president's commencement speech into an infographic, and that was one of our most successful pieces of content that we've distributed all year. So, yeah, I agree. I think that he's got a great strategy, but I think you can incorporate a lot of different types now too, which is really going to be more successful.
So how much of that do you do, Patrick, as the creative director? How much do you get to do creative before content? Sorry, that indicates that they're separate for you. I don't mean that. Just
we try to. I think we really tried to in the last year or two, especially with taking over the magazine, develop that as part of the entire package and think about the website for it and the iPad application and kind of video incorporation and other things. I think we had a lot of high hopes for a lot more of the integration across the three mediums, and then the workload sort of jumped on top of us. So writing a 48-page magazine 3 times a year, producing video for it, taking photography for it, it's been a blast. But really, looking at that and starting off for what visual could influence the content or the writing and the editorial versus what editorial can influence as far as the creative is a great adventure to be on. We're looking more at infographics. There's actually been some recent discussions about the lists. Anybody who signs up for an email from Mashable can't avoid a top 5, 8, 9, 12 list every morning in their inbox. They're obviously popular. If you've been reading any of the research on Facebook, as in the last year, photographs do drastically better than just links. People engage with a lot of photography. So thinking about how to tell stories or how to tell your piece without having to go to the really long press release and how to relate it to something that that the user might be interested or something that might be popular culture. Even before the advent of True Blood and some of that stuff, we had a professor who did, I think he was a physics professor, why vampires can't possibly exist. And the story's probably 8 years old and it still gets traffic as far as those pieces. And so we really do find relating to current content, whenever there's something about Mars, we have a professor who developed color targets that sit on Curiosity. And so every time it takes a photograph and they calibrate the color based on what this professor did. So literally our professor is involved or was helped to create every image you see coming off of Curiosity, which is a great thing to talk about. Hey, there's another photograph brought to you by the help of Dr. Britt. So trying to tie it to current events. So really, being able to imagine the content in a little bit different way is always a good thing, and that also gives you more longevity to your content. Being able to take a story that might be good for the news reporter or the journalist, kind of recontextualizing that and putting it into the hands of your reader, your audience, so they can share it and make it more attractive to them. And of course, over all the different media, you've got to between 140 characters to 200 and something, and as you move through mobile, what they can see on a mobile screen. So.
Well, we're almost out of time, so I have one closing question for you that I think kind of maybe hopefully ties all this together with a little bit of sense of humor to it. And I'll answer first so that you guys have a second to think, since I didn't give you a heads up on this one. And Patrick, you just kind of mentioned this sort of the pleasant surprise that you get out of some of the efforts. So I'm curious, what's the most surprising marketing effort you've ever been a part of? Either one that went really, really well when you were convinced that it was going to fail miserably but were talked into it, or on the other side of it, one that you went in saying, this is totally going to work, I have all the evidence, data, my gut is telling me, and then it just fails miserably. So I'll give you a second to think about that. And actually it was just last week I met with a group on campus here at Clarkson to talk about their publications and sort of their outreach strategy over a 30-week time frame. And I had a preview of it. I'm new here, so I can still be the guy who goes in and says, this is bad, this is bad. And I was fully prepared to do that, particularly on one of my least favorite things in the entire universe, which is the trifold brochure. I was ready to, above anything else, if I was going to go out of that meeting, I was going to kill that thing before I left.
Amen.
So I go in, and I sit down at the end of the table, and they have all these students who are part of this program there to also talk through what's working and not. So we're going through it, and I kind of broach it a little bit lightly. Above and away, every single student in there said, you can get rid of anything else, but keep this trifold brochure, because this is the one thing that convinced me to sign up for this program year after year after year. I need this take-home piece, and I need it in this format because it is better than anything else you're doing. And I was so stunned I didn't have a better suggestion, so now we're keeping the trifold brochure. So I'm willing to admit when I'm wrong, and part of that is not recognizing the nuance of the audience and that specific group of students who were enrolling in that specific program, going into that meeting just being convinced that the channel was wrong and that the medium was wrong. So I stand corrected, and I'm curious what other stories you guys might have. Anyone come up with one yet?
I actually have one. Last year, our commercial that we run during football games and televised events, we took a different approach and hired a company that, drones and video drone footage is very popular these days. And they hate it when you call them drones. And we took an approach with really looking at a top-level view of campus beauty and some of the things that alums and current students and people who might not be aware of what's actually here on campus of UCF might be interested in. That didn't show libraries and books and classrooms and labs. You can't fly drones in a lot of those areas. So these were very top-level, high-view images and fly-throughs, and we did manage to get on the basketball court and have a couple players dunking a basket and passing to each other. And I thought the end result was a bit cheesy, I will say. The music and some of the sound effects, and we were really kind of pushed by our vendor, and I think in the end it came out as a success in the eyes of the alums and as far as other people who are interested in UCF, potentially completely hated by the faculty, the leadership, and many of the staff. But when you kind of sit down and think about it, one of the ways that we talked about it was these are the things that make UCF unique as compared to other institutions around the country as well as Florida institutions. Who doesn't think we don't have a library? Who doesn't think we don't have lab classes and chemistry sets and classrooms? So these are the things that make UCF uniquely UCF, and it was the highest liked, shared, commented on Facebook post we've ever had since running Facebook since 2008, and that was a complete shock. So if you want to go see what kind of I was personally wrong about, it's out there on our YouTube page. So
excellent.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I guess there's two things. One is obviously, in terms of surprising results, some of these things that I mentioned with the whole Game of Thrones and the buzz articles, we thought there's a chance it would do well, but we were just shocked with how well that all did. In terms of shocked because of a failing approach, we had our marketing firm a few years ago. We're not with this marketing firm any longer, but we were really trying to stand out and be different. And we're in Farmville, Virginia, out in the middle of nowhere, and trying to get people aware of us. And they pitched this animated commercial idea, and it was fully animated. It was little characters and everything, and it was just completely off the wall. It's kind of provocative in some ways, and I guess they convinced us that, hey, this is going to help us stand out. Well, it ended up having a pretty bad reaction. Alumni were furious, and we just got so many negative comments. We dropped it completely, and that was a little shocking to us, I guess, but.
It's that balance between irreverence and humor and the sophistication of the university, and sort of finding that mix. I think that's a dangerous territory, man. I tell you, it's not an easy thing to nail down.
It is. It's true. And marketing firms like to push the boundaries quite a bit. So I guess it would push a little. Push a little too far at that stage.
Yeah, and then tell you you're being too stuffy because you think it's cheesy, or yeah,
Exactly.
no, we've all been there. So, what about you, Jessica? Close us out on something good.
I've had both since I've been here already 8 months. I've had a pretty good success and a pretty big failure. We did a campaign right around Valentine's Day. There was a big push for me to work on internal communications when I got here. And I really, that's not solved by a newsletter. That's not solved by a lot of things. I thought, what could we do? New College is a very, very small campus. It's 800 students less sometimes. So how were we going to do that? And we did actually a print Valentine for everybody on campus and had our president sign them all. And that got us national press because it was, New College president signs Valentines for every person on campus. Students loved it. Alum loved it. We had great response on social media. We had a social media infographic campaign around it. It was good. But then, a month later, we did a fundraising campaign. It was still very successful, but I was convinced that we needed to have a really cute hashtag around it, promote the heck out of that, and make it great. And the students hated it. They thought it was silly. They thought that it was all forced and inauthentic, and any goodwill that we got from the Valentines quickly went down with the other campaign. So, tried and true. Keep testing, keep trying things out. They've forgotten about it already, so.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think it's an imperfect science in some ways, what we do in marketing. That's why I wanted to spend some time talking about planning, and all the best laid plans can go horribly wrong if you don't consider them as a sort of a complete whole. I think that's a real important piece. Well, I want to thank you guys. We're at the end here, so I want to thank my guests, David, Jessica, and Patrick. Thank you for your time and your insights. It's been fantastic. And thanks always to our program sponsors, mStoner and FormStack. And feel free to browse the archives of higheredlive.com or subscribe to the podcast via iTunes. And I'm Tim Jones, and we'll be back with you next month on Marketing Live. Thanks again.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.